over before the game was done. Boom shakalaka, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters around the world. It is I, Chris Schul, and we are in for one treat on the Chris Schul Journey podcast. I'm about to interview Rothbard's disciple, also known as the Crypto Anarchist. Now, this guy is a powerhouse in the crypto movement. He's well known for breaking down the technical side of Bitcoin, of educating people when it comes to what's really going on with, well, the whole side of crypto anarchy, really, whether it's Bitcoin, whether it's political issues. This guy really is the deal. Highly intelligent guy, highly creative guy. We're going to get into some of the creative things he's been involved in. I know he's a writer, he's a developer, at least a designer, amongst many other things. And I've been following his work for about a year now. Many of you are no doubt familiar with his YouTube channel. If you are not, be sure to check it out. He's known as Rothbard's disciple. His Twitter handle is National Anarchy. And I have him waiting on Google Hangout. I think this is the first interview he has done. So I feel very privileged to have the honor of interviewing Brick. That's his actual name on my podcast. So ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, let's get Brick on the line. Boom shaka laka.
Hello, can you hear me?
I absolutely can. Brick, how you doing, brother?
I am doing very well. How about yourself?
Good to hear. Good to hear. So, I was just talking about you, what you've been up to, and your alias. I know that your name is Brick, but people know you as Rothbard's disciple, and I know there's been some name changing over the last year. I know initially I was familiar with your work familiar with you as Crypto Anarchist, and perhaps if you can just give me an insight into, well, one, how you got into the whole crypto scene, and I guess the story behind the name changing, and just tell us a bit about yourself.
Sure. So I'll start off with what got me into Bitcoin, because I actually got into to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, and I got involved with that quite a bit before I started up my YouTube channel. Originally, I was just really big into libertarianism. I studied a lot of libertarian philosophy from people like, Hans Hermann Hoppe or Murray Rothbard or Ludwig von Mises. I've read a ton of those books. There's a lot of free books on Mises.org, just in case anybody's wondering where to find some good books for resources for just learning about freedom in general. But I learned about a lot of things through that, and it just so happened that at the time that Bitcoin was getting big, and a lot of the people in the libertarian space who I was interested in, like I was real big into Adam Kokesh at the time. I'm pretty sure you've actually had Adam Kokesh on your show.
I'm a big fan of the cock. Not literally, as in like
a lot of those guys were really into Bitcoin, and so I just started looking at it, and I remember watching it when the price was like $20, and I think it went through like one of its first big bear markets from like $30 down to $2, and so that freaked me out. And then the next time I heard about Bitcoin, it was $200, and so I was like, okay, like I got to pay attention to this a little bit more. And so then that's when I first started, getting involved myself a little bit. Buying a little bit for myself. I got in there right before that big Mt. Gox tragedy. So, I've seen some bear. I've seen the one big bear market so far since I've owned the coin.
Yeah. Just to backtrack just a little there, Brick. Oh,
that's actually.
Sorry, can you hear me, Brick? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
I just wanted to ask when it was. I mean, what was the price of Bitcoin when you first bought it? Because you mentioned it was around $200 when you started getting interested in it. Or started paying attention, rather?
So it was around $20 when I first started paying attention to it and like looking at it, and I thought it was interesting, but to some extent I didn't realize how quickly something like that could take off. So I just kind of forgot about it. That's what happens with most people. You hear about it and you're like, that's really cool, but then you just kind of forget about it. And then the next time I looked at the price was around $200, I remember, and then I remember thinking right then, I was like, okay, I think I should start buying some right now. And that, I remember right as I first started buying, that was during the first big run up when it went up towards $1,200. So right around 2013, 2014, somewhere in there. That's when I first started actually getting involved. And I was pretty young then, so I remember when I first started, I was young enough that I almost needed like my parents' advice to some extent for investing, just because I'd never done it, so I had talked to them about it, and they were always, warning me against it. They're like, this is a terrible idea. But now when they talk to me, they're like, maybe we should have listened to you a little bit. But
Absolutely.
I always tell people like that, it's just real risky. But
Well,
yeah,
you
that's
strike
when
me
I got involved with
as
Bitcoin.
an OG, man. I mean, getting involved in 2013 makes you one of the originals, in my opinion. Most people, I would say, only really got involved. I mean, I'm talking about the majority of the public around 2017 when we saw the massive spike. But if you've been interested, if you've been following this thing and buying it from 2013, I'd say you're one of the originals, man. And I know.
Well, I wouldn't say I'm one of the exact originals, but I it was.
You're
We were
definitely
a
someone
little
that was
bit
already
crazy back then. Let's put it that way. Everyone was a little bit crazy who was putting money into it.
Sure.
Yeah, I could definitely say that, but.
Well, you've obviously learned a lot about this technology. I mean, I find it fascinating hearing about your story because when I started watching your videos, you struck me as someone that really understood not just the economics about Bitcoin, but the technology. And I mean, at what point did you start immersing yourself with the architecture and not just the philosophy? Because you're someone that's obviously invested a lot of time in studying this thing. Is that always been? Was that from the onset, or did you recently start taking interest in the architectural side of things and the code?
I wouldn't say that I looked at the architecture and the protocol too much at the onset. Like I said, I first looked into Bitcoin when the price was like $10-20, and I knew the bare minimum about it. Mm-hmm. So I didn't really look into it all that much then. But then when I decided to actually potentially buy it, I looked into it quite a bit, at least to the extent that I learned how mining and stuff works. And this might actually lead into something we might talk about later, but one of the first things that I noticed with Bitcoin, and it's my one real big problem with Bitcoin, was I looked at it and I thought that the block reward was off right from the get-go. I thought that having a currency where the inflation rate eventually hits zero will cause problems in the long term. And just for the audience for right now, just so you guys know, this shouldn't cause problems for at least a decade, if not longer. So this isn't like I'm saying the sky is falling right now. I'm just saying in the future there could potentially be problems. So when I had that idea, I actually, when I got in, like I said, the price was pretty low, and it was right before the price just skyrocketed. So I actually made a lot of money. So I was, I started looking into it enough so that I could try and hire my own team to build my own altcoin. Things sort of fell through on that, especially when the price tanked and whatnot. And I'm actually glad things fell through, because at the time I was too young to actually probably, get anything done with it. But yeah, I like to get involved with things, I guess. And just because of when I got involved in Bitcoin, I've done pretty well with it. So that's given me sort of the freedom to some extent. Like, I'm not massively wealthy by any means whatsoever. And if you actually look at like my living space and like the cars I drive, I get the cheapest of all things. But that's just because I'm trying to build my own businesses. But within Bitcoin, if you got in early enough, a lot of us are fortunate enough that we have some money to throw around on some crazy, wacky things, you know what I mean? And so I tried to do that pretty early on. And then, like I said, once that bear market hit, I did not have the money now to pay a developer. Like I potentially could have, but then I would have been, using up all my money. So I decided instead I was going to focus on writing. I'm a writer as well. So I started writing a bunch of different stories, and the things that I'm writing as well, you can actually use blockchain technology to help with. This is one of the things I made my video that I featured you in, was about tokenizing just different digital files and things like that. So ever since I guess I've been involved in Bitcoin in some way or another, I've had some sort of plan of some sort of business that I would like to do or like to create within Bitcoin. As of so far, like, the only thing I really make that much money from is I've got a little bit of a mining operation. The rest of it's just me experimenting and trying to figure things out. But that's basically the way I learn, is I just get my hands dirty and just try and do what I can and just experiment with it. But
absolutely, no better way than to learn from doing right. And you're someone that's fully invested in every side of cryptocurrency. I mean, I find like most people in this space, that they tend to just get Bitcoin and hold on to it and hope that it'll go to the moon. But you're obviously someone that is developing. I mean, you're a creator. You're not just a teacher. And I guess what I find really fascinating that I want to go into is some of the creative pursuits that you have, because you're from what I've seen, you're a writer, and you've developed at least you're planning these games that are really, really creative. I've actually been checking out your videos about how you created these worlds with these diverse languages and characters, and I'm curious in regards to how you want to get other people to develop parts of this game, this world, and have it in some kind of like blockchain based game. Like, if we can get into that a little, because I find the creative side of what you're doing very fascinating, how it kind of ties into Bitcoin.
Sure, yeah. So when I first got into Bitcoin, one of the things, it's actually kind of weird because there aren't that many people who talk about using Bitcoin and tokens in the way that I do, which kind of surprised me. And to some extent, I would assume it's because, most of the people working on blockchain technology, they all come from the same background, so they sort of think the same. Really, the only developer who talks about using tokens and whatnot in the way I do is Craig Wright. That's kind of just an aside right there, but Craig's got some real interesting views too. He's an interesting character. But
No doubt.
as far as the tokenization for the artists and whatnot go, the way I view Bitcoin is as simple as possible, and by that I just mean it's just a distributed ledger, right? So if it's just a distributed ledger, that means it's basically a notebook that everyone shares. Now, where I see people go wrong with this is they try and do things like what Ethereum's trying to do, and like people like Vitalik Buterin, they'll even talk about Ethereum almost as like a world computer. I don't know if that's the exact term he uses, but he's got some sort of term that is similar to that. And it's like, well, technically speaking, you can use a distributed ledger as a world computer, but if a distributed ledger, like a ledger is literally just a notebook, it's like, why are you trying to use a notebook as a computer? And so as far as the smart contracts for the artists and, whether it's musicians or writers or movie makers and whatnot, all that I see or all that I envision for them to be using a blockchain for is it's basically like you're posting work up that you need done for whatever your project is. So like in your case, you're a musician. Let's say you're looking for some sweet guitar solo in some song that you've got, you really want a guitar solo. And so you just post up your song on the blockchain, and then what you can have is a bunch of other people, they'll give you different guitar solos that you can choose from, and then all that you would end up doing is whichever one you choose, you hash it to the blockchain just so that everyone can publicly see that, like, oh, hey, this is, like, I'm using this audio file from this person, I'm incorporating it into my song. And what's really revolutionary about this is, as of right now, like, if you talk about musicians like yourself, if you want to start a band or you want to create music with people, actually finding people to create music with is very hard. And even if you find people who, are talented enough to create music with you, what's the chances that it's going to be at the right time in their life that they have, all that free time to help you create that music? Maybe they just got married or whatever. It's really hard to do. So what something like this does is it allows people from all over the world to connect and collaborate. And so long as you can hash files to the blockchain, you can collaborate with some musician from across the world, and you don't actually have to actually know them or see them. All you have to do is have some way that both of you can post onto this distributed ledger.
Sure. And I guess the accountability is that everything is on the ledger, everything is on the blockchain. So let's say if you do decide to use someone's guitar riff in one of your songs, and you decide not to pay them, I mean, the world can see what's going on. Is that the case? So, I mean, there is obviously accountability. Just
the one thing you have to remember is that there's always, and this again goes back to, again, Craig Wright and the way he talks about smart tokens, but you don't ever replace what I would call like regulation or the law to some extent. So people can still steal your songs if you use this format, right? They could take your songs and they can, try and distribute them illegally or whatever. And there's nothing you can do to stop that. But because you've posted it to the blockchain, you can be like, look, like there's a time-stamped transaction on the blockchain saying that I had access to this file at this period in time. So unless they can, show that they had access to the file at an earlier period of time, obviously then you're the creator rather than them. And so it's basically it's creating a trail,
Sure.
like a paper trail, basically.
Sure. So
I wouldn't go far. Go ahead.
So in regards to, I guess, let's say applying this onto, let's say my work as a musician, because
Sure.
I checked out the video that you made, featuring me. Thanks for that, by the way. It's really awesome to see my music featured in your smart contract idea like that. But I guess what you'd be proposing, let's say if you're going to work with me on some kind of creative project or something like that, is, correct me if I'm wrong, but let's say if you create an idea for a music video, and you map out all the different I guess characters that are going to be in the music video, and the basic plot for it. If I decide to use your design for my music video, then I would be giving you some kind of a reward for it. Like how would this be structured as far as on the blockchain? Like if you perhaps could just take me through how this would be done. Let's say if we were to
Sure. I'll actually walk you through like an example. So, and I'm actually gonna use an actual example of one of your music videos. So I hope you don't mind the call out for that. But actually, I don't think you have a music video for this song. But the one song I really liked of yours, I'm going to shout out is I think it was "I Don't Even Care."
Sure, man.
It was on your Going Thunder album, I think, or maybe it wasn't on that. I can't remember.
No, it was
I can't remember. But the name of the song was "I Don't Even Care." But if you were looking to make a music video for that, what you would do is you would hash the file song, and you might hash the file with some. Go ahead.
Just bear in mind that you're speaking to laymen. Just assume that I am an 8-year-old child here, because whereas I'm somewhat familiar with a lot of the terms that you use, I want to fully. I want not only to understand this, but I want everyone that is interested in what you're talking about to understand this. So when you say hash this to a file, can you break it down to as easy
sure. So a
hash
is it's a very simple sort of algorithm, and what it does is it takes a digital file and it acts almost like a signature for that specific digital file, such that when you run that particular digital file through the hashing algorithm, you're going to get this random string of like numbers and letters that's like 32 or 64 characters long, depends on what hash algorithm you use. But the only way to get that specific output of those specific characters is to hash that original file. So if you take another file that looks very similar, but if it was altered at all, the hash will be different. So when you hash a file, all you're basically doing is you're guaranteeing its integrity. So if you were wanting to create a music video, the reason why you would hash it before you put it on the blockchain is you want to make sure that everyone knows what song they're writing the music video for. So by hashing the file, this is specifically the song that I want to write the music video for. And the other thing about hashing a file is obviously if you try to put a full music video or like a song on the blockchain, I don't know how you would put audio on the blockchain, but the file is obviously a lot bigger. So a hash of any file, it doesn't matter how big the file is, the hash is always going to be like the 32 or 64 bytes, and so it's always this small set size. And so the reason why that's important is because with a blockchain, because of all the information for the blockchain shared by all the nodes, you don't want very much information being shared. So yeah, when you're hashing your music video, you're just hashing that just to say, hey, this is the music video, and that's just the way you have to put the information on the blockchain. So it's almost just like saying, or you're basically just creating a transaction that represents the music or the song. It's not actually the song itself on the blockchain, but just something that represents it.
Okay. So all right. So continue. So let's say you put one of my songs on the blockchain. And I mean, as far as me, let's say, so the whole idea, correct me if I'm wrong, is let's say you create a music video or an idea for me to have as a music video. Now, it's not saying that I necessarily am going to implement this in my music video. However, if I do decide to use this idea that you have, then of course I would reward you. But let's say,
Correct.
I mean, what's to stop? I mean, to play devil's advocate over here, what's to stop someone from seeing this plan of yours? I mean, correct me from everyone would have access to the idea that you have, right? But
let me first walk you through. Let me back you up just a slight bit. So
sure.
when you actually hash it to the blockchain too, the other thing that you'll do is you won't create a normal Bitcoin transaction. You'll actually create tokens. And so when you hash it to the blockchain, you'll create this token, and that token will represent the music video. So for your song "I Don't Even Care," you would create a token called like "I Don't Even Care" tokens, and then you would create 100 of those tokens, and that's all the tokens there would ever be. And each one token would represent 1% ownership. So if you had all 100 tokens, that'll be 100% ownership. So then once you you'll have a bunch of people writing scripts. So like if I was trying to write a script for a music video for you, I would not be the only writer trying to do this. It would basically be a bunch of writers would hand you a bunch of scripts. So the other thing too to remember about this is it's not always the best way to make something. Like it'll be helpful for some people, but obviously if you have 100 people send you 100 bad music video scripts, it won't work. But once you've tokenized the script, you look at all these music videos, and if you decide on one music video to use, then you will send a certain amount of tokens to the writer of that script based on some sort of pre-agreed upon contract.
Sure.
On how much ownership they'll have out of potential future profits. For something like a music video, that's not necessarily a for-profit business as much, so it'd be a little bit more complex. I guess big artists would have some amount of money they're willing to pay for music videos. I'm not really sure, but you can do this for more than just music videos. You can do it for actual creation of music or movies,
Cool,
anything
I like
that. But
so essentially, sorry. I just like to talk so I can kind of like concrete the ideas in my head. Like if I feel like if I articulate it, then I understand it. And correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially what you're doing is you're getting a quote from someone. Like you want to get a script for a music video, so I get a quote from you and potentially many other people, and if I like it, then I decide to use it. Would that be accurate?
Yep, that is completely accurate. And the other thing too that you had mentioned earlier, you said something about like can people so it was something like, will they publicly be able to see like the work you do? So can they like steal it? The only people who could really steal your work are people who you're trying to create for. So like, let's say in your case for creating a music video for you, like if I wrote you a music video, I'm going to be sending the music video directly to you. It's not going to be posted publicly unless you end up using it, and at that point, then you post it publicly just to finalize it in. And at that point, both of us want it to be public because we're finalizing our contract. But so beforehand, like the only people you have to worry about are the people you to some extent directly work with. But the other thing with this too is that, and I know intellectual property is sort of a hot button topic for a lot of anarchists, and I don't know whether or not this would technically speaking count as intellectual property. I don't know what to call it, but the thing that's really nice about this system is it actually incentivizes people to want to share their work and work honestly with people, because obviously in your case you're trying to and I don't know how much you're necessarily working on your music career, but you've got some good music there, and so there's some potential there, and obviously I would assume that if you had the chance to make it big, you would kind of want to pursue it. But if you're working with people, honestly, you're obviously going to get a lot more people to help you. So you want good script writers if you're making music videos. You want good people. Like, obviously, you can dance real well. I don't know if you need a choreographer, but if you did need a choreographer, you'd want to work with the best. And so obviously, you don't want to screw people over in something like this. And because everything is linked back again to your address, it's linked to you at least pseudonymously, so you'll have your own reputation, and so everyone's going to want to some extent, at least cooperate. Obviously, there will be people who won't necessarily cooperate, but that's the way it is with any business to some extent.
Absolutely. I was going to ask you about that because I think that's the important factor in any online business. I mean, eBay works because of the accountability. Obviously, people want to have a good rating, so there's this incentive to obviously to submit goods that you're supposed to, and so forth. A few interesting things to bring up from that conversation. I mean, one, I love the idea. It's definitely something that I think it actually has been done to some extent. Like I know there are actual online sites that, or not sites, but there's definitely an app that allows musicians and artists all around the world to collaborate together. And I'm not sure how the contractual side of things work, but in fact, this was released a few years back by this celebrity. This celebrity created some kind of program, some app that allowed people to collaborate and actually produce things together all around the world. So I feel like this is kind of working on the same kind of model. But yeah, it's definitely something I'm open to. Like as far as being able to see what other people can come up with for a music video, I'm definitely open to that. So Brick, if you want to take it upon yourself to kind of create some kind of smart contract, yeah, I'm down for that. Provided I resonate with the script. Obviously, it's something I'm open to doing. Sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, yeah, the other thing to remember is, like I'm sure there have been attempts to do certain things like this in the past, because there's obviously a market demand for it. The real interesting question is where specifically it is that blockchain technology, will just be the most efficient for these different industries, because that's something you can never know looking forward into it. It's like, what will this work best for? It's kind of like, when they first came out with the internet, one of the biggest companies was Amazon that came out of the internet boom, and all they did was, sell books on the internet. And that's kind of a weird, like if you would have thought of all the things that would have gone big when the internet came out, just selling books on the internet being basically, Jeff Bezos now, he's one of the richest men in the world.
Absolutely.
It's kind of crazy. So yeah, I don't know specifically, like making music videos, like I said, that's sort of a niche thing.
Yeah,
don't know if that's necessarily the best for it, but there's a lot of different, like anyone who creates anything digital, you can use this. The question is, will this be the best option? That remains to be seen, but it'll be interesting because it's an entirely new way to start corporations. You could have collaborative corporations where people don't actually really necessarily know each other except for, sort of through the internet and connected through the blockchain. And it's weird, to be honest. I think it's very exciting.
Absolutely. And look, I got to give mad props to you, man, for being an innovator. I mean, you seem to be at the forefront of trying these different things. I mean, you're the first person that I'm aware of to actually come up with this idea of creating a card game of some sort, online blockchain-based game, and you've actually taken steps to make that happen. And that's something I want to get into, by the way, on another note, because I find your work really fascinating. It's interesting because I think, a little like myself, you tend to be involved in quite a few things. I mean, I think most people that are familiar with your videos, they see you as being this crypto savage, someone that's really well versed in the technological side of Bitcoin. But you're obviously a writer, and I find, whereas I haven't read any of your stuff, I mean, hearing you talk about some of the worlds that you've created, I know that you created these languages for them. You've obviously put a lot of thought and detail into that. And I find that really fascinating, man. And it seems as if you're someone that's willing to put yourself out there and try new things. And I think this is what, this is the kind of stuff that we need to see. And obviously, most people that are able to succeed big are usually the ones that are willing to take the risk and be the innovators. So I'm curious. Let's talk about you a bit, Brick. When it comes to the creative stories that you've been working on, I mean, is this something that you've been doing for most of your life, or is this a new thing? Like, when did you start writing stories?
That's a very interesting question. Like, when I was a student, it was kind of interesting because I wasn't really interested in writing much at all. I was more of a just straight math and science guy. I did really well in school and whatnot. And the drive for me to write, it was never about writing itself, but it was just sort of over the years, I didn't really like the way movies, the direction movies were going, I guess, to some extent. I don't want to go into too much detail about how I craft my stories, but there's a specific flaw I see in the way that people make movies nowadays. The simple way to say it would just be there's like a weakness in the strong characters, There's almost...
not enough detail?
there's almost like a drive towards making people make bad decisions to some extent. I don't know. Like there's weird things within different stories that I don't really like. And one thing that actually really drove me to it though was I had always wanted to create a story for Star Wars actually. And so when Disney first bought Star Wars, I got real excited because I was like the time period that I thought they were going to cover and the stories I thought they were going to cover. Those were my favorite stories, but when Disney bought Star Wars, they immediately like killed off all the old stories. And so I had actually for a while I had this idea of trying to write a story that would connect all they're called the expanded universe Star Wars stories together.
I'm familiar with that.
It's just all the Star Wars stories that
Yeah.
weren't actually the main Star Wars stories, and they were pretty cool. And I wanted to fit those together, and so I just started writing. First, actually, about the history of the galaxy. I took sort of a J.R. Tolkien approach.
I was going to actually mention that, because if I can just interject, one of the things I've noticed, and granted I haven't read any of your stories, but hearing you talk about that stuff, you seem to be someone that's very much into detail, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like when you write a story, you map out the entire universe, not just the characters, but the world that the characters live in, all the relationships they have with other characters. You go into, like, one of the things I love about J.R. Tolkien is in his stories he goes into different languages, and I know that correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard you talk about how you've actually come up with a language for one of your stories, and you strike me as someone that is very much interested in detail, and I feel like that's missing in a lot of the movies that we see, a lot of the stories that we see.
Yeah, that is definitely one of the things that I see that's missing too in a lot of the stories that come out now, like with J.R. Tolkien, and Lord of the Rings, like all the way that all just fit together. It was really kind of beautiful. But the one thing people don't realize from a writer's standpoint is that actually helps you when you're writing, because like when I was writing the story that I've shown to most everybody, that would be called my masterpiece to some extent. That's the one that I've done the most work on by far. I write a bunch of other different shorter movie scripts. Those are like 120 pages or so. They're not that hard to write. It's hard to actually finalize one, but 120 pages isn't that long. But the masterpiece story, yeah, I went into a lot of detail on that one, but that was mainly because I thought of it in the way that Tolkien did, that if you're going to have this massive story that you're going to tell that's just has massive heroes and incredible enemies, you almost need a backdrop for the story just to contain itself, because the one thing that's really nice about my storyline for this galaxy is that I've made so many planets now that they each have their own specific sort of economy or the way they're ruled. They're allied with different other planets. So if I'm looking for something specific, like, hey, I need this planet where there's a bunch of smugglers and they're allied with this faction and they're against this faction, it's already ready and it's sitting there for me. So I don't have to sort of after the fact, when I come up with something I need in the story, I don't have to just create something new to fit that specific example. You just sort of have this backdrop for a story, and then you set your story within that history, I guess.
Absolutely. You strike me as someone that really likes to plan out your stories. I mean, I know that I've heard Stephen King speak about the two different story writers. I mean, you have what he calls, I think I may be butchering it, but the architects, people that like to plan out every aspect of everything in the story. And then you have, I guess, what you might call gardeners, like people that allow the story to unfold as they tell the story. Like I know an amazing author that had this ability was I think maybe Isaac Asimov or something like that. Like he had this ability just to create stories on the spot, and then of course you have writers that plan out everything, very much like you would if you're developing a cryptocurrency. Obviously it requires a lot of thought and effort, which also ties in. I wanted to ask you, what is the currency that people are using in your world in these stories? Have you gone into that kind of detail?
I do actually. I go into a lot of detail in this. The currencies actually in my story in this galaxy, they're slightly different in different regions of the galaxy, but that's just because of the economies of the different areas of the galaxy. So, like, obviously it's a fantasy story, so there's a little bit of magic, and so the idea is for some of the in order to do certain magic spells, you need certain gems. And so some areas of the galaxy where it's more magical, they'll kind of use gems as currency. There's gold and silver.
No, there's no Bitcoin.
There'd be some sort of fiat as well. But yeah, there's, I think part of just my background in cryptocurrencies and just my love for money and the economics of money made me go into detail on that. That's not something that specifically is necessary to the story, but because I was putting detail in there, I figured why not.
Absolutely. Well, let's go into the economics of money a little here, because I feel like most people are familiar with your work because of your critiques of the different cryptocurrencies, and I really want to get into that because you're someone that is obviously schooled up on this stuff, and you have some strong views, some different directions that you think Bitcoin should be going in. So let's talk about that a little. When it comes to cryptocurrencies, I know you're would you say you're a Bitcoin maximalist? I mean, which cryptocurrencies do you think have the best chance of succeeding at the moment? Why? And if you can critique what's wrong with them, that'd be great.
My view, I am a Bitcoin maximalist, but the word Bitcoin means something slightly different to me than it does to everyone else. Bitcoin to me is just the idea of a blockchain-based currency, and I do believe there will only be one that will end up winning, just because it's just simplest that way. If you think about money is what everyone what they value goods in, and so obviously if it's most simple and it's most efficient for everyone to use the same money. So I think one will end up winning, where I think there'll potentially be like a couple small ones that are just there, as a just-in-case factor in case there's like a catastrophic failure of one chain, maybe. But it'll be a lot smaller market cap. But yeah, I don't necessarily believe that what most people would call Bitcoin, whether it's Bitcoin BTC or Bitcoin Cash, I don't believe Bitcoin BTC has any future. But a lot of people would say one of those are Bitcoin,
words.
And I'm not necessarily sure that's true.
Why do you feel that way? Do you see something else at the? I know you're a big fan of Zcash. Is it because you see something in the future being likely to overthrow the Bitcoin Cash? What are your what's your rationale for that?
It mainly has to do with the block reward, and this goes back to my main flaw in most cryptocurrencies, is that I think if the block reward drops too low, obviously the block reward is what incentivizes people or the miners to mine on the cryptocurrency, and if you don't have people mining the cryptocurrency, you don't have anything, obviously. And so my sort of question is whether or not Bitcoin can reach the transaction volume quick enough that it can be completely weaned off of the block reward and just run off transaction fees alone. I know that it can do this. I just don't know if it'll necessarily do it in time, especially considering because, like I said, I got into this, I first bought my Bitcoin around 2013 or so, and I was watching it before then. Big blocks were always what we were going to do. There was no real question about it. People talked about things like Lightning and whatnot, but the idea of just having 1 megabyte block sizes was insane. And so now that we're here, in 2018, and nobody's really even sure what the real Bitcoin is anymore as far as the masses are concerned. Obviously, I would think you would call it the real Bitcoin Cash. I think Bitcoin Cash as of right now is by far the best version of Bitcoin we have, but I'm just not necessarily sure if since we've wasted all this time, have we wasted too much time? I'm not really sure. And the other thing is I'm not a developer, I'm not working directly with any of these projects, so I always just want to hedge my bets. I don't want to get people involved who watch my channel or anything like that. I don't want to get them in head over heels, and because there is the chance that Bitcoin can fail, and I don't want
absolutely.
A lot of people I think aren't concerned about if they lose a lot of other people's money, and I am concerned about that. I hope everyone who listens to my advice does well, but you can't guarantee that. But
yeah, I like to tell everyone that look, at the end of the day, I'm accountable for my own actions. But look, if you guys want to take my advice, don't blame me if it doesn't work in your favor. But look, I think what you're saying is perfectly rational. I mean, if you're looking at it in terms of whether or not Bitcoin in the end is going to be the winner, I mean, in what time frame? Because I know within about 100 or so years, that's when we're going to be seeing a situation where there are no block rewards. But at that point, I mean, that's so far away that I don't really think it's an issue. I mean, obviously, at some point, at some point, whether it's 100 years or 1,000 years, something is going to replace Bitcoin. I mean, this is unavoidable in technology. Technology is always like replaced by something better. I mean, obviously we started at a time using, I don't know, seashells or something like that, and obviously we evolved to better forms of money. I guess it comes down to the time frame. I think when most people look at whether or not Bitcoin is going to be successful, they're looking at something within the time frame of 10, 20 years, if it's going to be Bitcoin Cash or BTC. But I mean, what you're saying is that because you don't know if once there are no block rewards, if the transaction fees are going to be enough to make Bitcoin work, that's in my mind such it's not going to be an issue for a long time. That to me, it's not worth thinking about because it's so far away. Like when I look at that question, which cryptocurrency is going to be successful, I'm looking at this within the time frame of, let's say, 10 or 20 years time, and based off of the cryptocurrencies we have at the moment. Do you see any other cryptocurrencies as being at least having a better economic system for being the most utilized coin?
For the next 10 or 20 years, I'm not sure. I think Bitcoin Cash will probably take the cake. If we're just talking next 10 years, I think so. And obviously, I can't see into the future, so don't necessarily quote me on that. Although I don't mind being quoted because a lot of times it can turn out real well. And I'm pretty confident with Bitcoin Cash because the protocol is very strong on that. The only other ones that I could see potentially having a chance as of right now would be some version of Zcash and some version of Zcoin. And the specific reason for that is the privacy. It can be a very big thing. And I know a lot of people think this privacy is for trying to get away with criminal transactions, but it's not that at all. It's just that if you have some oppressive government and all your blockchain data is visible to everyone, they can just go back and look at that, and they can, try and imprison you for something you did in the past, which obviously in places like America, I would assume in Australia as well, they can't, go back or they're not supposed to throw you in prison for things you've done in the past. But obviously if you get, the wrong people in power, things like that can happen.
Yeah, that's always a possibility.
But I think the privacy coins have a chance. And the other thing that I like about those privacy coins, because if it were privacy alone, I would not be that interested in them. But I think as Bitcoin Cash's block reward drops, just because of the fact that mining will be less profitable for some of the miners of the SHA-256 coins, they might move over to coins that have different hashing algorithms so that they can still continue to mine on a coin with a higher block reward and thus potentially higher profit. So I can potentially see a couple coins that would succeed with Bitcoin Cash, and like I said, my two top coins right now would be Zcoin or Zcash. And it's not even the coins that I necessarily like with those, it's the protocols. I like the Zero Coin protocol. That's my favorite privacy protocol. The Zero Cash one is okay. I think that one's got a lot of support behind it, so I think it's worth looking into just because it seems to be the community favorite right now. But
well, when you say Zero Coin protocol, do you want to talk about that a little? What are we talking about when we say that?
Did you say the Zero Coin protocol?
Yeah, is that what you said?
Yeah, there's the Zero Coin and the Zero Cash protocol. So the Zero Coin protocol, it's very simple. It's almost like you just have a second blockchain and a second set of tokens that runs with your original coin. So you can actually do the Zero Coin protocol on top of any other coin. I know people like Jonald Fuchball of Electron Cash. He's potentially been working in Zero Coin and Zero Cash into Bitcoin Cash through the use of tokens. So you can do it that way as well. But all that you're doing is you will send whatever coin it is you originally have. So like let's say you had Bitcoin Cash to start with, and you wanted to send your Bitcoin Cash privately. Well, you'll send Bitcoin Cash to a certain address or whatever, and those Bitcoin Cash will basically get destroyed. And the reason why you destroy those Bitcoin Cash is because your transaction history is linked to them, and you're trying to be private, right? And so once you destroy those coins, you create new coins, and you create the exact same amount of coins, and you send those new coins to the same address. And so the only thing that this does is if someone knows who you are and who your address is on the blockchain, it gives you pseudonymity back. So you're not necessarily anonymous would not be the right word. Like obviously if you're pseudonymous, all they know is that you're one particular person, but they don't know who you are. So it's just a way of giving pseudonymity back. And the reason why I like the zero coin protocol in particular over zero cash is that the zero coin protocol, you can always see how many coins there are. So with zero cash, the privacy on it, one of the ways it gets privacy is you just don't know anything about the transaction that happened. A problem with that is if there's some sort of bug that allows for duplication of coins, you can't see it happen because you don't see the total supply. And the reason why Zcash does that is they're trying to increase the privacy, things like that. I think Zcash went too far with their privacy protocol. But with the zero coin protocol, you always know how many coins there are. And that's why, again, why I say it's pseudonymous, because you always know that the coins are there. You can see the addresses and stuff. You just don't know who is associated with that address. And I think that's if you think about it in terms of like your banking, most people would go crazy if your financial records, were public for everyone to see. But that's the way a blockchain is. It's entirely public for everyone to see, and that's kind of weird because people can learn to do blockchain analysis. So what happens if some weirdo is trying to figure out how much money you have to extort you or something? Whatever they're trying to do. It's like I'd just rather have some sort of privacy protocol in place.
Absolutely. What's the counter argument to that? Because I know I'm so glad you brought this up, because I know that the privacy issue, that's one of the biggest contentions that you have between Craig Wright in regards to Bitcoin Cash. I'm inclined to agree with you, man. One of the reasons that I got interested in Bitcoin, of course I'm referring to Bitcoin Cash, was just the whole privacy issue, like the idea of not having the government have its freaking nose in what I do. And when I say that, I mean like the idea of being able to transact without having my money controlled by the government, without being taxed. And in my mind, the best way to do that is to have anonymity or pseudonymity. And I'm curious, like, what's the counter argument to what you're saying? Because I know that Craig Wright says that the fact that Bitcoin is pseudonymous is, it's a good thing. It's obviously it's integral to it being successful. And would you understand like the counter argument in regards to?
Yeah, I would say I do understand the counter argument, and I would say the other thing too is I think that Craig and I, to some extent, we have very similar views, but Craig has the attribute that he likes to enlarge disagreements and whatnot. But the counter argument against the privacy is it's pretty simple. There's two counter arguments. One is that you want to have enough of a public record so that you can prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that either you did some transaction or that you did not do some transaction, and that can go from either just business relationships, because like obviously if you're working with somebody and you want to prove your credit score, you want to if a bank's trying to loan you out money or whatever and you want to give them your credit score, you want to have a history of it. And if you have a history on the blockchain that you can show them all the data of, that's always good. The question that really remains, though, is where exactly you draw the line, because it's not exactly a black and white issue. It's hard to tell exactly how much privacy is enough, because with something like Bitcoin Cash, even if you don't do something like the zero coin protocol, you can sort of set up wallets and whatnot so that everyone has enough privacy so that it works. And that's sort of what Craig Wright talks about. My question is just whether or not that's enough. The other thing too is you always want to make sure that you can still track criminals, and this is where Craig and I would probably disagree most. He would say that if you use something like the zero coin protocol, it's going to be really hard to track criminals, and I think he's wrong with that, from the simple fact that when you're trying to track a criminal, don't follow you, generally speaking, from a completely digital footprint. It's generally speaking from some sort of physical footprint. So like, let's say if you're, getting drugs through Bitcoin transactions and whatnot to your house or whatever through something like the Silk Road. I know the Silk Road's technically speaking not up anymore. I don't know what they are anymore. I'm sorry, I'm not that into that area of this of Bitcoin, but if you have drugs sent to your home through Bitcoin or something like that, there's physical evidence of that, right? The drugs are physically coming to your home, and so that's where the police are really going to catch you. And so I really think that you can still have good police work with something like Zcoin or Zcash or Bitcoin Cash with the zero coin protocol on top of it. It's just that you can't trace them through the digital footprint alone. So you could trace it, like if you have something like ZeroCoin, you can say, hey, this much money got sent to this address, and then if you find some criminal who you suspect of a crime, you can find their wallets and you can see if they have that much Zcoin in that address. And even if you can't say for a fact that you know that that Zcoin came from that crime, if you have some bit of physical evidence that they've committed that crime and they just happen to have that exact amount of money, you know, in their wallet or something like that, you know, it's kind of obvious what happened. So it's not that easy to get away with these crimes. And if you actually watch some videos, I know it makes a lot of people nervous. Maybe it tells you a little bit about what they do with their Bitcoin, but if you watch videos of people like the FBI and whatnot speaking at blockchain conferences about tracing criminals, they do talk about tracing criminals who use things like Zcash. I think they talk about Monero as well. Zcoin doesn't get mentioned as much because it's not really that big of a cryptocurrency right now, but it is possible to some extent. But to another extent, I'm not enough of an expert to say where to draw the line, because it's not black and white, you know what I mean? It's
Sure.
You got to make sure users have enough privacy, but that you can still trace or you track bad guys. So
well, there's the
you know,
thing.
it's
It
hard
comes
to
down
say.
to the perfect balance, and I guess what would be great is if people could have the choice of whether or not they want a transaction to be private or public, right? And I mean, the fact that you can obviously do things to make your transactions more private or your addresses more private, as far as shuffling, to me it obviously addresses the issue to some extent. I mean, if people want to take that extra step to ensure that they're more private, but having said that, it would be cool if it was already inbuilt in the option to immediately just make a transaction private or public, to give people that option.
Here, you're gonna have to say that again. You kind of cut out
sorry,
there.
I
For
was
a
just
little
saying,
second. Sorry.
and let me know if you disagree, but I guess what would be great, in my opinion, is if people had the option more easily to choose if a transaction was public or private.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm big on the options part, because there are definitely times when you want to be public. Basically, like if you go back to the tokenization of, you know, digital files that we talked about earlier for the projects that I was working on almost all of those, you want to be public, because obviously, like I said, it's a reputation-based thing. So like for a majority of transactions, you do kind of want to be public to some extent, just because there's benefits to it, whether it's proving to someone that you have a good credit score, or even to some extent, I know a lot of people like to say bad things about giving companies your metadata for ads and whatnot, but that is actually helpful because it gives you ads for products that you actually like. So there are certain little things where you want to be public, but then other things you definitely do want to be private. Like if I'm buying a home, I don't want people to know whether I paid cash or what the, you know, how much my payments are for that home. I don't want them to know those intimate details of my life. I don't want them to know those things. So I definitely agree with you on the whole idea of having choices. Because yeah, there's times for both, and that's to me what Bitcoin is about. The one thing that I really love about Bitcoin, and the one thing that I actually really love about Bitcoin Cash, is the idea of forks. Just because you know, if you don't like the way things are going, you know, you can just fork it away and you can go and you can do your own little thing here. And so if Bitcoin goes down a wrong road, it doesn't matter who takes it down that wrong road. It can always be forked. So that's one thing that I really like about Bitcoin. So even, you know, I think we're going to get options no matter what, just because of the way Bitcoin is built, that if certain coins or whatever don't give you options, they'll just get forked off. Because I really think that's what Bitcoin's about. I mean, it's basically about financial freedom, and freedom itself is just choice. So
Agree with you there. And Brig, I see so many things that we agree on, but I really want to get into the stuff that your criticism, because one of the things I love about your videos is you're very opinionated, and you have very analytical, well thought out positions on things. And when it comes to your criticisms of Bitcoin, specifically Bitcoin Cash, what other issues do you see with what's going on, and not even necessarily with Bitcoin Cash, but just with other cryptocurrencies? What are the biggest problems that you see, and the biggest fallacies that you think people are buying into in this space?
The biggest problem that I see, and this is within Bitcoin Cash as well, this is within everything, is the way people are building apps, and the way they think about things like tokenizations and decentralized corporations. A lot of people really think that somehow through the blockchain you remove like the human element or human like leadership almost. They think you can automate things. They take the idea of decentralization and trustlessness, too far. So I think the biggest issue that I see with crypto in general is trying to move towards some sort of almost like matrix-like future where everything's run by machines. I think people are really underestimating how important the human element of the blockchain is. I've actually made a couple of videos on this a while back where I talk about how, for me, like, because a lot of people, one of the big things people talk about within Bitcoin and crypto is smart contracts, and this is what I think that they get wrong. But when they're talking about smart contracts, they're always talking about in the most basic computing terms, they're talking about computers where you have an actual digital computer made of silicon running things. When I talk about using a computer for smart contracts, I'm talking about using humans. Humans that, because a human can do a lot more than a computer can. And as we talked about in those, or the tokenization of the, whether it's music videos or whatever, that's the way I see the computer that is Bitcoin, I guess, to some extent, or smart contracts. The computer that is smart contracts being executed is where you're actually having humans do things off the blockchain, and then they store their own, like, they store the human work, I guess is what I would say. I feel like this idea of automating everything, whether people are trying to create, decentralized internet, things like that. Some of these actually have merit to them, like a decentralized internet, but some of these things, they're just not that great. I don't know if I explained that all that well,
No,
but yeah,
sure,
my
and
biggest
that
issue
makes
would be
sense.
with smart contracts
Yeah.
and just how they're implemented. The best shortened version of my explanation of that is I don't like the Ethereum way, and I like the Bitcoin Cash way, but I know
Sure.
not everyone will necessarily understand that.
I know Vitalik wants to have some kind of like artificial intelligent aspect to Ethereum, right? And I've also heard Craig Wright speak about some of the shortfalls of smart contracts, in that people have this idea that they're going to replace law, and that there are many aspects of a smart contract that you just cannot assign to computing. I mean, when it comes to law, I remember reading one of his posts that shone some light on this. That ultimately, when you were trying to resolve certain things, I mean, it's always going to come down to a human aspect, human component. You can't assign all contractual law into an algorithm. It always comes down to the human element. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. It's like with the, if we go back again to that example of the tokenization, like if I were trying to create a music video with you, it's like we said, you can't, like, it's not going to be completely automated where, if you actually create some sort of application for this, you still need some sort of entity that, monitors disputes. You could try and steal my work. It doesn't just automatically work. And I think that this
absolutely.
is where the biggest issue is, where people think that somehow it just automatically works. And they sort of conflate that from the idea that the miners sort of, for Bitcoin, they automatically add transactions. But that's sort of a different dynamic. That's the only real decentralized, completely trustless part of Bitcoin, is that the miners will add your transaction. You can do bad things with that transaction. Like I said, you could try and, steal people's IP or whatever, or steal people's money with your transaction. The decentralized and trustless part is just the fact that your transaction goes through.
No doubt.
Um,
And I'm so eager to ask you this question, because you're someone that's obviously very creative, you're very intelligent, and I feel like we're moving into the realm of artificial intelligence. We've obviously established the fact that computers can't do everything, but as I say that, I'm thinking to myself that we are moving into the realm of the singularity, the technological singularity, the asymptote. And I mean, we see technologies like 3D printing now, and people like Elon Musk speaking about artificial intelligence perhaps being a real thing. And what is your vision? I mean, how do you see the future? Do you think we're going to be living in this age where we have somewhat artificially sentient computers that are? I mean, what's your vision of if you had to map out how you see the world in 100 years? Do you think that everything is going to be run by computers? Do you see a world full of Bitcoin transactions? I know I'm giving you a lot of leeway with this question here, but I want to allow your creative side to kind of shine through, and
um,
if you paint a picture of the
oh,
future for us.
If I were to look 100 years into the future, the first thing I would say is I'm going to get everything wrong. The second thing I would say is, yeah, the one real interesting thing with Bitcoin that you can actually do is, to some extent, you can have wallets that are sort of controlled by AI. I actually hate the term AI because AI, as it currently stands, it's a lot simpler, at least as far as I understand it, than most people think. It's not exactly what you would call intelligence. You can still do a lot of interesting things with it, like the fact that Tesla cars, they'll basically drive themselves. That's
Well,
awesome. I would love
back up a
for
little. I mean,
driverless cars. Things like that would be interesting.
back up just
But
a
the
little.
one thing that I
Sorry,
I
Craig.
do see.
Can I
Go
just
ahead.
ask you, because you mentioned something really interesting, like you wouldn't define artificial intelligence as actual intelligence. I mean, expand on that a little. I mean, how do you define intelligence? Sorry to kind of just back
That
up there, but
that's actually
that's an interesting
that's a
point.
very interesting question, and the only real reason that I've thought into this too much is actually I've thought into the artificial intelligence for my fantasy stories. But there's one thing that I think a lot of people sort of misunderstand about, even if you were to make what you would call intelligent machines, the intelligence of machines would always be slightly different than the intelligence of humans. And what I mean by that is, like, a machine doesn't have flesh, it doesn't have organs, it doesn't feel emotions or pain in the exact same way that we do. It's always going to be slightly different. So you can make things that sort of mimic what we would call human intelligence, and you could even make some sort of new intelligence. I guess artificial intelligence would be a good name for it, but I'm not sure if we're necessarily at the point where we would have artificial intelligence, because I would think that would be so unique. I guess it's like, what type of music does an actual robot prefer, and why? Like, if you think back evolutionarily in terms of humans, it's like, some of the sounds we like might be for certain reasons, because we liked hearing certain birds or whatever.
Hmm.
For a robot, it's hard to it's hard to say. It's a little bit different. And then because
Hmm.
of the fact that I don't know, it doesn't really have an evolution into you just create a robot. It didn't really evolve as life. It's a little bit different.
Well,
So
apparently computers can. I
that's
mean,
not really related to crypto at all, but
that's
that's
true.
an interesting question when you
It
talk
kind
about
of.
artificial intelligence and what that can actually mean.
No doubt. I think it's a really fascinating question. You made the point there in regards to computers not evolving, and look, I have my own perspective on this, but I know that when you're following the works of someone like Elon Musk and a lot of the people that are at the forefront of this, I mean, the idea of creating robots or the artificial intelligence that's able to evolve, actually make improvements upon themselves. I mean, that in itself is an aspect of artificial intelligence, and the fact that we actually have. I mean, they now have this game. I wish I could remember the name of it, where every time that every time these bots, these computers, they play this game, they improve. They figure out how to actually play the game better, and they make changes to themselves, and they become better and better and better. And it's fascinating because that's maybe 10 or 20 years ago, that would have seemed like an impossible thing. But we're in that realm right now where we actually have technology or some form of artificial intelligence that is able to make incremental changes on itself and essentially evolve. And I don't know, it's just
Yeah,
something that I wanted to mention there.
it's very interesting. I think because I do, obviously I'm interested in these things. I
Mm,
think I just use different terminology to some extent, because they obviously are making advances and whatnot.
mm,
Because I've seen some of those things as well, where there's the self-learning for different, whether it's a game or whatever they're trying to
sure.
do, whatever the program is, it sort of teaches itself. Yeah, it's very interesting, and on that front too, I don't know enough about that either. I can
Neither do
talk
I.
about what I think I know,
Yeah, and we're
and
both
to be honest,
philosophers.
from
We can
listening to you
speculate
talk
and
about
talk
it, I would
about.
assume you actually know a little bit more about it than me. I've only really ever thought about artificial intelligence as it relates to robots in my sci-fi story. So,
Well, that's where it starts. I mean, to me, it's more philosophical than it is anything. I mean, I think about my own ability as a human being. I mean, what defines my intelligence, and I mean, the awareness of my awareness, and I also think about how you'd actually simulate that. And I mean, what I find really fascinating about your story is you're someone that obviously doesn't come from a software development background, but yet because you kind of have this inquisitive mind and you've done the research, you've been able to like take these bounds in your understanding of all these concepts. I mean, when it comes to explaining the technical side of Bitcoin, I mean, you're definitely up there, and I actually invite people to check out your work because I think you have a tremendous understanding of this stuff. But you've been able to acquire all this knowledge not because you're an expert in these fields per se, you've gone through normal channels of schooling, but because of the way in which you apply yourself to learning. And I guess what I'm saying is you don't necessarily need to come from an expert field in order to be someone that has a valid opinion on such a topic. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I would say that for most people, like one of my favorite characters from books when I was reading up, it was actually, the name of the character is Mike Donegan. It's from one of Ayn Rand's books.
Okay.
I think he's actually from the Fountainhead, but Mike Donegan, in the story, he's just some construction worker. He's very good at what he does, but he just learns by doing to some extent. And he's always in the story, he's got a bit of a disdain for academics because they keep their noses in the books for too long and they don't get their hands dirty. The one thing I would recommend for most people, it's something that I think people don't do that much anymore, is just test things out on yourself. Just experiment. Don't be too afraid to take a few risks. The thing that really got me going within Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies, to some extent, it's the fact that, like, when I got really confident in myself when I first bought, because the price went up so quickly, and then the price tanked on me, so that made me really question myself. But after that first price run up, I got real confident, and I just started trying everything that I could, and that's really just the best way to do it, is just get out there, get your hands dirty. You'll learn quite a bit. And the one thing you got to remember too is that Bitcoin as a system, it's a lot simpler than most people make it out to be. Like you can't learn, if you're not a developer, you can't learn how to code it, but you can learn the basics of it, like the math that is involved with it. It's easy enough that you can at least understand it even if you can't do it. That's one of the things that I really love about it. The other thing that I would recommend to any entrepreneurs out there, maybe to yourself as well, because obviously you do quite a few things. You got your music and your singing, and like I've seen your dancing skills. You're an incredible dancer. You got this podcast that you got going on. One thing that I think is really good for people like yourself or myself who are trying to make something of themselves as an entrepreneur in different ways is get your hands dirty in a lot of different ways, because you won't know how one area will help yourself in a new area. And that's kind of the way it worked for me. I never would have figured that writing and blockchain technology would really go together, but once I started creating all these worlds, it just sort of clicked. And so if you kind of get yourself spread out a little bit, I think it's really helpful rather than just get stuck in one mindset and one avenue. But
it's a tricky one. I think about that more than I think about anything, because one school of thought is this. I think of this quote from Miyamoto Musashi: "Once you see the way broadly, you see the way in all things." It's this idea that once you understand the fundamental theme that resides in excellence, you can discover that in anything that you do. Like once you master excellence, you can apply that to all these different fields, and you can succeed at that. So you become, you learn, you can become a master of many, many things. And it's true, definitely, but you find that there's only a certain amount of time you have, and I find the more time that I spend in one particular endeavor, obviously the less time I have to focus on one thing. And there are certain things that connect. I mean, when it comes to music, singing, I feel like singing and dancing and a lot of the arts, acting, they're very connected. Like you find you can master how to actually perform, how to present yourself with a particular way. But there are certain things that don't translate quite as well. For instance, becoming a master at coding, for instance, is not necessarily going to translate into something like, I don't know, creating music. It might, but I guess that's my 50 cents on that.
Yeah, I would agree with that to a large extent. The one thing I've noticed since I created my YouTube channel actually is I haven't been writing as much. But the other thing too is when, at least for me, I don't know. I know I've seen you do some live shows and whatnot, so you might actually make more money from. I would assume you make more money from music than I do from writing. I've never made money from writing, so.
I mean, you got gigs, but when it comes to actually producing your own music and getting, I mean, like I feel like your analysis of that video that you made, I mean, it was pretty much on point. Like, I mean, music is my passion, but I'm not receiving any kind of like substantial income, nowhere near that from my music. I mean, outside of gigs, I put up my music, and people, it's more about promoting yourself and having a following.
Yep.
But I don't have. I mean, I really do appreciate you purchasing my EP, man. But it's definitely not something that I receive a lot of. Like a lot of people buying my music. But nonetheless, I think it's important as an artist to create content. So that's the drive. The fact that I love
Yeah,
creating this
absolutely,
stuff.
absolutely. And I do think though that when the one thing that I was going to add to that was just when you're in the stage that you and I are, where we're trying, and a lot of it's just you enjoy what you're doing, I would assume, and so you're going to do it anyways, whether you make money or not. I enjoy writing, so even if I never make money from it, I'm going to keep writing. I just like to do it, but. When you're not making that much money, the one thing that's nice about dipping your hands in a lot of different things is then if one of them takes off, then you just sort of pursue it. So that's kind of the way it worked with me, is like when the Bitcoin bear market came after I first bought Bitcoin, it was like Bitcoin wasn't doing well, so I did a bunch of writing. Bitcoin started doing well, I moved over to that a little bit. It's just kind of, I like to have a bunch of different things that I enjoy. That way I can fully put myself into those during those time periods, like when I need to. I do think that actually loving what you do is really important. And I can tell, I do have to say, some of your music's really good. Like I like I always love music that has a little bit of a message to it, but still does it in a way that's not like beating you over the head with it. And I like sort of the way you do it. So I would recommend people check out your music. It's pretty good. It's pretty
Thanks,
good.
man. And likewise, I'm not just saying that, but you're someone that struck me as being very analytical, very intelligent, and it's interesting hearing you speaking to you right now because. I mean, the impression I got from your videos initially was that you really like confrontation. Like, I like the fact that you're one of these people that doesn't shy away from critiquing the hell out of people. I mean, your initial videos were very, very argumentative, and you struck me as someone that was a bit of an activist. Someone that was very understood the shit out of things. And it was interesting later on to kind of get this other perspective from you because you have this other artistic vibe where you're obviously massively into creating, and I feel like with that comes this whole approach of kind of being sensitive to other people's like it's more like an emotional kind of thing. And I don't know, just I don't know, I just feel like I've gotten a different perspective from your artistic work. The fact that you really do get into the psyche of characters, you kind of you're a complex person, man, and it's fascinating.
Well, one thing I would add is for anyone who, if you guys do look up my videos, especially at the start too, it sort of started as a ranting channel where like I said, I got into Bitcoin sort of early, and I saw a lot of things I didn't like going on. And a lot of people who were just big names in the community, and I was like, these guys have no idea what they're talking about, and so you'll see that a bit in some of those videos. Another thing I will caution is that, and I made a specific sort of cognitive choice when I made my channel. I wanted to do this. I am sometimes over the top with my confrontation or confrontation ability. That's not a word. I'm a writer. I should have better words. But
it's great entertainment,
sometimes I'm over the top with what I do, and it can get sort of insulting to certain people. And to some extent, what I wanted to do with my channel as well is have something that is very politically incorrect, just simply for the idea that I hate political correctness. But what I see with a lot of people doing on their channels is they try and argue against political correctness. But my channel, to some extent, is shock therapy. I almost see it like if you've ever, you follow Craig Wright's Twitter feed, but
absolutely,
it's to some extent like that, where he'll say things that are over the top. But to some extent, I like this just because I feel like things have to some extent gotten oversensitized. And like you said, though, as a writer, one thing you have to get into is people's psyche. So I do actually understand the emotional aspect of people and whatnot. Yeah. So I don't want to insult or hurt people, but
that's what I meant, like your emotional intelligence, man. I mean, with Craig Wright, I know he has it, but he kind of he's this very, very intelligent, analytical mind. But when it comes to understanding like the emotional side of and being good with, let's say, social interactions and things like that, I don't know if it's the fact that he doesn't care. I love it either way. Like, I love the confrontational side to him.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of it just because I feel like to some extent we've been starved of it, where everyone tries to tell us what you can say and what you can't say. So to some extent, I just love when people say whatever's on their mind.
Absolutely.
But then, yeah, there is the other side where it's like with with recent events, it's almost like with this hash war going on, it's like I don't really know what's going on. It almost seems like personal issues between developers, and it's like I wish
Yeah,
they could have had some more communication or something like that. But
no doubt.
I don't know. It's hard to say with
Well,
Craig.
I just wanted to wind this thing up, but I'd be annoyed at myself if I didn't bring up just the upcoming potential. I've heard Craig Wright refer to it as a split, but a lot of people look at this as another fork. I mean, from my understanding, you got Bitcoin ABC, and then obviously N-Chain, and they're kind of having disagreements in regards to the direction of Bitcoin. And I don't know if you're too familiar with what's going on there, but do you have any
Yeah,
thoughts on what on
I'm
what
sort
side?
of familiar, but I'm not really sure why it's happening from either side. So if anyone's watched my channel before, you know that I, for the most part, agree with Craig Wright
Mm,
on most everything with his vision in general. Obviously, you know, even people like Omri Sechet, who I disagree with to some extent with, or Peter Risen, or, you know, Andrew Stone, or any of those guys, I still agree with them on most everything. The thing
sure.
that kind of I don't understand here is the main thing that is really being argued over is the ordering of transactions, whether it's in the topological or what they call natural ordering, or, you know, canonical lexical ordering. And those are real long words and they sound complex. But they don't really mean anything. And what I mean by that is you can do Bitcoin either way for the most part, and I don't think there's really any serious issues with you know, either using the topological ordering, which is what Craig Wright wants, or using the canonical lexical ordering, which is what ABC wants. So I'm a little confused as to why we're doing it. I sort of agree more with Craig Wright, but again, this goes back to where we were talking before. I just wish there was a little bit more communication here.
Sure, sure.
I'm a little confused, is all
Well,
I can say on it. But
that pretty much sums up this entire world of Bitcoin. I mean, if someone like you is getting confused in regards to the technical side of things, man, imagine how other people that are just only just step their toes into this thing and have no idea in regards to what's going on the technical side. And at the end of the day, to me, I have no idea in regards to what design is going to be the best, because when we're talking about the future, when we're talking about what's going to work best, what's going to bring about maximalism, I don't know. We can all speculate, but the way that I feel is that fundamentally, the plan that was in place, the original idea for Bitcoin, Satoshi's vision, call it what you will, that's something that a lot of time and effort was put into. And granted, I'm sure it's not perfect, but the fact that it hasn't been given a real opportunity to flourish per se, and the fact that I also believe in the people that are behind it. I mean, this kind of ties into the whole Craig Wright business. I mean, whether there's some people, granted, I understand it doesn't matter. At least that's the idea that we're told. The fact that I believe that the people behind this thing had an idea and knew and are in a best position to know what's likely going to work, I'm more inclined to trust their plan, their roadmap for Bitcoin than I am people that have just recently gone into this and want to try different ideas. So, being someone that does support what Craig Wright has been doing, having gone through all of his videos, like I've gone through pretty much all of your videos, I trust that they understand enough about what they're doing to put my faith in what they're doing, if that makes sense.
yeah, and I would actually say the only thing I would add is the only thing on either of these two sides that sort of makes me nervous is something on the ABC side.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually, if you've watched my videos from a long time back, I talk about this as a potential good thing, and it is a potential good thing, but it's so new and experimental, I'm not sure that I really want to try it on the original Bitcoin chain. It should be, I think it should be hard forked, but that's blockchain sharding. And blockchain sharding can mean a couple different things depending on how it's defined, and there's been so many arguments going back and forth and so many insults, and people are banning people enough. I'm not sure specifically the sharding that ABC is talking about, but all that blockchain sharding is you basically split the blockchain up into smaller parts and then you distribute it, and that makes it easier for nodes because they don't have to download the full chain, but that can fundamentally change the way Bitcoin works. And so that was one of the things being discussed with ABC. So that would be a long-term thing. Nobody even knows if sharding is even possible, I think, as of right now. There's sort of attempts at it, but it's kind of like lightning routing. So that sort of worries me in the future for the ABC side. But again, I think you can still fork it. So like as far as this upcoming fork, I'm not going to do anything with coins on either side of the fork. I'm just going to sit it out. I'm going to wait and see. Like I said, ideologically, I'm more in support of Craig Wright's side, but we're at a very interesting point in Bitcoin Cash's
Yeah.
history to some extent that we're going to have a hash war over a slight change that isn't necessarily, I don't think it's fork worthy, I guess. Like, I don't think either side, like, they're not incompatible visions as far as I can tell to some extent. Like, I understand where the problems are coming from.
Mm,
I understand that the SV side wants the bigger blocks. And like I said, I'm with SV, I'm with Craig Wright clan.
likewise.
Ideologically, I'm just not sure strategically for Bitcoin Cash if this is necessarily the best thing, and I don't know how to play
Sure.
it.
It's definitely very fascinating. I often think, I mean, who needs Game of Thrones when you have the stuff that goes on with Bitcoin coin,
Exactly.
Bitcoin Cash? I mean, outside of just the technical side of things, I mean, I guess I want to leave it on this question because I feel like one of the underlying conversations anytime you bring up Craig Wright is this whole, Satoshi Nakamoto business. And I watched a video that you created on your just your view in regards to Craig Wright, in regards to how you initially didn't like him, or at least didn't really buy into a lot of the things that he said, and you've challenged him on many things, and you'd admired the fact that he's been open to continuing discourse with you. And I guess what I want to ask you is, what are your thoughts on Craig Wright in regards to his involvement? I mean, as it stands at the moment, we understand that obviously Craig Wright has been involved in this thing for a very, very long time, and a lot of people still want to call him a fraud. Granted, he hasn't officially said that he is Satoshi Nakamoto. We understand that Satoshi Nakamoto, at least according to Craig and many other figures, that was a team, involved many people. People, I feel as if, don't like the idea of Craig Wright being associated with a team. And what are your thoughts in regards to Craig Wright's involvement? Are you under the idea that he is somehow involved? Do you think it? Let me say whatever you feel is appropriate.
Sure, I'll give you my piece because it's an interesting question. It's always interesting to try and answer. My thoughts on it are, I've watched a lot of Craig Wright's videos. The one thing that always stuck out to me on Craig was he and I understand the economics of Bitcoin in the same manner, I guess. That doesn't necessarily mean he or I are correct, but it was the one thing, like, if the video that you referenced, just in case any of your audience doesn't know, I originally had thought Craig Wright was a potential con man involved with the Mt. Gox thief, or the Mt. Gox theft. I'm not going to go into the reasons why, but that was just a thought. And that like, I had no information on the guy other than I had read a couple articles that he was a fraud, and so I was like, well, maybe he was involved in Mt. Gox because that was something that had happened recently. When I started watching his videos, and I just agreed with the guy on like everything, and I loved his style. I can tell he's a bit of a, like, an objectivist. He really likes Ayn Rand. I can really see her style in his work, I guess. Ayn Rand was always very combative. I always loved reading some of her stuff, a lot of her nonfiction stuff, because she'd get real aggressive in what she said. But yeah, so I got interested in him because of that. As far as potentially him being Satoshi, the one thing that I would say is, one, I don't know, and so I'm not going to make a claim on that, like, as though I do know. I do know from watching his videos he's been involved early enough that he definitely potentially could. There's actually a couple interviews that that exist on the internet of him before anybody knew who he was, and they'll ask questions about kind of how many coins he has, or how Australia, the continent of Australia, is doing as far as Bitcoin goes. And the way he answers it, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence that could point to him being Satoshi. So it wouldn't surprise me if he is at all. The other thing too is that, like I said, one of the initial problems I had with Bitcoin was the block reward. However, and this is kind of a weird correlation here, but if you look at Craig's personality and Satoshi's personality, they seem sort of similar in how they wanted to use the block reward to their own advantage. And what I mean by that is Satoshi in the early days, obviously, he mined quite a lot of Bitcoin, you know what I'm saying? And he was trying to get a lot for himself. There's multiple reasons why you would want to do this. Obviously, if you created something like Bitcoin and you put all that effort into it, you want to make sure that you have enough hash power so that you can't let malicious actors take control of it and whatnot. But the one thing that sort of indicates to me that that there could be circumstantial evidence that he could be Satoshi again is just the fact that if his personality is such that it almost seems like he could be one of the guys who would, or in Satoshi's earliest emails, he told people maybe we shouldn't GPU mine in the beginning. And so there were different things where Satoshi almost was, his greed got the better of him to some extent. And you can understand that if you're Satoshi and you invested all this money into these processors to mine Bitcoin, but that sounds like something Craig could do. So there's different flaws that Satoshi had, or whether like sometimes when Satoshi would get mad, some of the words he would use, they're words that Craig would use. There's different circumstantial things that can point Satoshi to being Craig, but I don't like to make or I don't like to say for sure. He definitely could be. But the other thing is, too, is, again, from the beginning, I thought that Satoshi chose that block reward. Like I said, I thought he chose it because he wanted to gain enough control for himself. And so to some extent, I never liked Satoshi. Not that I didn't like Satoshi, but I thought Satoshi there were flaws in the way Satoshi did things. And so when people try and associate Craig with Satoshi, it's a different thing for me, because to me, Satoshi is someone who I admire him, but I see flaws in him, whereas other people see him almost as this like perfect entity. So when other people ask whether or not Craig's Satoshi, I sort of correlate Craig as being Satoshi from circumstantial evidence, and then the flaws of Craig and the flaws of Satoshi. And then other people try and say, well, if Satoshi's this perfect figure, well, Craig's not this perfect figure. And that's never the way I viewed Satoshi. But
that's a
like I said, I don't really know.
Enlightened way of looking at it, man. I feel like Satoshi has a different meaning for different people now. It's not necessarily related to a person per se, but it's also a group, and people have an idea of who Satoshi was. So I think Craig Wright may very well not be Satoshi, and may very well be Satoshi at the same time. And I think what is very clear in my mind is that there are plenty of people that have been involved in this. I mean, objectively, we understand that many people have been involved in the creation of Bitcoin. And we also know that as far as the blockchain, I mean, if you want to break down what Bitcoin is, I mean, not just the blockchain, but the economic component, and say that, and speak about specifically the origins of it from the blockchain, we understand this has been around, well before the early 2000s. So if we're speaking about all the different entities, all the different groups that actually formed this thing that we refer to as Bitcoin, it's a group of people. It's many people. We obviously know that it's very clear that Craig Wright has been involved in this thing from an early time. There are people that have developed this thing and have influenced the design of this thing to get it to the point that it is at now. And to me, I guess it comes down to how you want to define Satoshi Nakamoto. I think it makes more sense to look at it as a group, but in regards to the white paper, I mean, the question, I don't know. I know some information came onto the fore recently, it was just released today by Bitcoin.com, that there's another guy called Phil, I forget his full name, that says that he actually worked with David Kleiman and Craig Wright. And
was it Phil Wilson? Was that the name of the guy? I thought I saw that going.
That's
making
right.
The rounds.
And he's saying, so you're familiar with the story. He's basically saying that he kind of veered off, decided to start his own version of Bitcoin, which he's very, very little of Craig Wright's work, if anything. And he's saying that it's his design that has become the the Satoshi client. So I think when it comes down to what Bitcoin is, I think it's a combination of many different people that I still feel as if the biggest influencer. I mean, I'm one of these people that tends to buy into what people say, unless of course I see a tremendous amount of evidence to show that I shouldn't buy into what they say. And I think what Craig Wright said initially still holds, that that he was part of the members of this team that created what we refer to as Bitcoin, and that is enough for me. In regards to the full story, there's a lot of circumstantial evidence, both for and against, but to me, it's very clear that Craig Wright is obviously someone that was involved in this thing. And in regards to the white paper, granted that may not be as clear-cut, it's still very clear to me that Craig Wright has been involved in this thing, and for all means and purposes.
He definitely was involved very near the beginning, if not exactly at the beginning. That's the one thing that you can't really deny. And the other thing is, if you look at the way just people act around him, I guess, to some extent, like you can't have that much power, I guess I would say, without there being a reason for it. People like Calvin, who's a billionaire, listens to him. There's a reason people listen to him. So I guess I would say, for me, whether or not he's Satoshi, could care less. He could be Satoshi, and that's what's interesting to me, is where the potential, like whether or not he actually is Satoshi, that to some extent to me is irrelevant, because that all that means is that he's got a lot of money. But again, and I would say, if he is Satoshi, I wouldn't say he is Satoshi. I would say he was Satoshi. I see Satoshi almost as like a throne or a mantle that someone just they take, and if they just happen to be the person who is moving Bitcoin forward that much, then they are Satoshi. So in the beginning, like when Bitcoin first started, Satoshi, whoever that Satoshi was, they fulfilled that role, but then they stepped away. And even if Craig was Satoshi then, I don't think he necessarily fulfills that role now, even though he's still very powerful and important. I wouldn't necessarily say he fills that role now, but
that's a great way to look at it. I quote Craig and say Satoshi is dead. So whether or not you want to take that literally or metaphorically, I think that could have a lot of validity. So at the end of the day, man, it's definitely fascinating stuff. Brick, it's been an absolute pleasure discussing this stuff with you. I know there's a lot more that we could go into. I mean, you also have a very strong philosophical, anarchic perspective on things, on a lot of the issues in the world, but I try to keep these podcasts relatively short. I think we're going to the 1 hour.
Yeah, I was going to say we've
now.
been here for a while now. Maybe on another podcast
Absolutely.
we could talk
In fact,
a little more philosophy or something.
Absolutely. One of the things I'd love to do, open invite. I think it would be great to hear you talk about many of these issues with Craig Wright, and I know initially I did want to organize something like that. So open invite, Craig. Would love to. The next podcast that I do with you, I would love to get Craig involved if he wants to. I'd love to just to sit back and hear you guys talk about some of your. Whereas I understand you agree with Craig on pretty much most things. Just perhaps, discuss some of the issues in regards to Bitcoin that you may have, and I think it'd be brilliant to hear. Rothbard's disciple, have a conversation with with Mr. Craig Wright.
I think that would be great. I would love to. I'd love to have a conversation with him. Like I said, he and I. It's very interesting because I just sort of found him by happy accident, and we sort of agreed a lot. And then the one thing that people actually don't know, or probably most people don't know, is just he started retweeting my videos, and I didn't have a Twitter. I didn't have anything. I was just had my YouTube videos, and I didn't know anything about it. Someone just told me about it later, and it was real. I thought that was really cool, but it didn't surprise me too much just because we had agreed on so much. But I'd love to have a conversation with him, not only to talk about what we agree on, but those things that we slightly disagree on. And the one thing I would say is, I know, some people think he and I disagree on quite a bit, but we don't necessarily. Sometimes we're kind of confrontational, both of us, so we'll go at it a little bit. But I would love to talk with the guy. I think that would be great.
Absolutely. Well, I definitely hope that's going to happen. I'm going to try to make it happen. Brick, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. You are a scholar, you're an artist, and you are a gentleman, as combative as you like to be in some of your videos. But bro, really enjoy this conversation, man. Thanks for hitting me up, and look forward to checking out more of your content. Ladies and gentlemen, be sure to check out Rothbard's disciples' work. He is absolutely a powerhouse when it comes to his breakdown of pretty much everything. He's a fascinating character, as you're no doubt aware. And let us know what you think. Drop some comments. Give us some feedback on our thoughts. Let us know if we don't know what we're talking about. Love to hear from you. Share this video. Tell your mom. Tell your friends. And let's get this stuff out there. So anything you wanted to drop before I let this thing go?
No, I mean, the only thing I would say is, since you're dropping me a little bit, I would say check out this guy's music. I know some of his singles. It's like I Don't Even Care, Mama Africa. He's got a lot out there. One of his albums is Going Thunder. Just look up Chris on YouTube. You can find it. He's actually really good. Definitely worth looking into. But like I said, I'd love to be back on. So anytime you want me, just let me know, and we'll see if we can figure it out.
Absolutely. We'll make it happen. And thanks for the kudos, brother. I salute you. Peace out. Keep it real. And look forward to speaking to you again. Catch you later, bro.
Sounds good. See you later.
See ya. ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. That was Rothbard's disciple. You may know him as the Crypto Anarchist. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to him. We really covered a lot of stuff. Yeah, it was a very seamless conversation. You know, like I had all this stuff that I wanted to bring up, but I didn't even have to look at it because I don't know, it's just a really cool guy to talk to. Conversation just flowed. Ladies and gentlemen, let us know what you think. Once again, peace out. Keep it real. Don't drive in text. I'm Chris Schul, the esoteric noetic, and I'm going to lead this with my promotional video. Going Thunder. You know, people in this life, they'll always tell you what you can and what you cannot do. You can't let nobody put limitations on yourself. You gotta know that deep down inside, you got the will, you got the power, you got the fire. So if you wanna go, you gotta go like thunder.
Without the beats, you hope the most shine. Bring home the rain, need no introduction. Have a moment, ponder on that weakness. Rise above it, keep working on that game, son. I'm a vibe to school, you and I thunder. I'm a ring, the groove, you know I got some. Told me that it can't be done, but I told you the battle was over before the game was done. Now if you think that I'm gonna let you run my body, my heart, and my mind, then you better listen, son. Oh, you think you're invaluable, yeah, act like an idiot.